This signal hasn't been used for over 35 years. It remains locked in place, slowly decaying at the side of the Liverpool to Manchester railway line at the scenic Sankey Valley. It guards the entrance to a long since lifted railway line that served one of Europe's largest military bases. Going past on the train, you'd never know anything was ever there. At the end of the 1980s, access to this now hidden spur required a Ministry of Defence police escort to a rendezvous with soldiers in order for train drivers to unload their nondescript trains that carried military supplies for the Gulf War effort. There's not much of RAF Burtonwood left today. In fact, aside from the odd reminder, memorial, street name or pub, you'd never know it was here. Burtonwood was the largest military airbase in the UK during World War II and was responsible for the handling of over 15,000 aircraft of the United States Air Forces covering the UK, Europe, Mediterranean and the Middle East. It was home to 18,500 US servicemen and women at the end of World War II and was responsible for an estimated 50,000 personnel in all. It was opened as a Royal Air Force base in April 1940 and transferred to the US Army Air Force from 1942 until 1946. American operational flying ceased in 1959, although the RAF used Burtonwood as a V-Force bomber scatter airfield until 1966. The base was taken over by the US Army in 1967 as a storage facility for war supplies in case war broke out in Europe. It remained this way until 1993, when the end of the Cold War heralded the end of the necessary deterrent. Site 8 was located on the southwestern side of the airfield. It was a huge warehouse used for storage. Construction started in January 1953, and the warehouse opened on August 16, 1954. At 5,280 feet long by 1,255 feet wide and a capacity of 5 million cubic feet, Site 8, also known as Header House, was the largest covered warehouse in Europe with a total building cost of £12 million. The Army developed Burtonwood into a storage and forward supply depot operated by the 47th Support Group. The idea of Site 8 was that in the event of Cold War fighting, US troops in the USA that were earmarked for NATO service in Europe would fly over and pick up their kit from Burtonwood before going on to their deployment. This never happened, of course, and by the end of the 1980s, Site B was full of supplies including all manner of vehicles, hazmat suits and auxiliary equipment for the Gulf War effort. There's been much debate as to what exactly was stored at Site 8. Some believe nuclear weapons were stored there, although there's no evidence for this. What's added to these rumours is the comings and goings of freight trains into the 1990s, carrying all manner of things in and out of Site 8. A little known and largely forgotten railway served Burtonwood until the very end. Not much information exists publicly, but I've spoken to the people who were there to bring you the untold story of Britain's Little America branch line. The branch line into RAF Burtonwood consisted of over 4 miles of track, and it had its own railway sidings, locomotive shed, and was connected to the Liverpool to Manchester railway line. As well as serving Site 8, it ran through the Burtonwood Repair Depot. A large part of Burtonwood Airfield was the Burtonwood Repair Depot, also known as the BRD site. This was an enormous factory built to the southeast of the airfield in 1939 and then occupied in 1940 under the control of the Air Ministry. The site was later taken over by the Ministry of Aircraft Production and in 1942 was transferred to the US Army Air Force. It functioned as a facility for aircraft maintenance and repair. The depot workshops included facilities for the modification and repair of airframes, overhauling and testing of engines and variable pitch props, and woodworking and metalworking. They inspected and packed parachutes, and serviced and repaired aircraft radios in the base's heyday. Little is known about the branch line, but it was heavily used. In June 1944 alone, 3,442 rail wagons were unloaded at Burtonwood, an increase of 63% over previous months, while 9,834 tons of supplies were shipped out by air, road and rail to US units across the country. In the 1970s and 1980s, what was referred to as a local tripper regularly served Burtonwood. The trains were called Target 71 or T71 or Target 74 or T74. I've also heard the name Central Shunt referenced too. They would go to Burtonwood once a week at most. The trains were always brought in late at night under the cover of darkness. Class 20s, 25s and 31s were used. Anything larger, for example a Class 37 or Class 47, wasn't suitable due to route availability restrictions. The carriages and wagons looked the same, so it was believed they would have originated from the same depot. The line in and out of Burtonwood was on the Liverpool to Warrington Central and Manchester line. This provided a direct link to and from the Liverpool ports. There was no connection into the base from the line from Warrington to Liverpool, so to access the Burtonwood sidings, the driver had to travel in the wrong direction from Warrington Central towards Liverpool, but on the Liverpool to Warrington Central direction line. Moving from Warrington Central Station, the train would run up to the signal on the up line, which was facing the wrong direction to normal traffic. It didn't apply to Liverpool to Warrington trains in the normal direction of travel. The signal was controlled by a ground frame. Its coloured access glasses have been smashed and it's rusted, but it's amazingly managed to survive. In the last 35 years it's not been used. The ground frame is now gone, but consisted of levers in a frame, similar to what would have been in a signal box, which controlled points and signals leading to the siding. This may be the remains of it in the undergrowth. The ground frame was normally locked, and when unlocked by a signalman, it allowed the guard on the train to turn the points from the main line into the Burtonwood complex. The signal would then be cleared by the guard from the frame. Once the train was inside the siding, the guard would return the ground frame to normal, the signaller would relock the frame, trapping the train in Burtonwood, allowing trains to operate normally on the main line. This is what's left of the spur into the branch line. You can still see ballast on the ground. The entrance to the main line is blocked by a set of gates. Moving up the first part of the spur, we arrive at a small gated crossing, complete with concrete plinths and barbed wire, a small reminder of this place's military past. Here the driver had to telephone the Ministry of Defence Police, who would come and open the gate into the base and close the road crossings along the branch. Once clear, the train entered further into the base and would be met by somebody. It would move at walking pace and was escorted by whoever met the train on foot. Parallel to this spur was another siding which ran from Cromwell Avenue Road Bridge towards the river along this route. As the train continued into the siding, it passed other spurs. The first to the right was the BRD main sidings, with one set running towards and ending at what is now the Washington Drive Kids Playground. Another set of 3 sidings lay behind what is now Vermont Close. The longest BRD siding ran up to what is now California Close. It's unclear when the use of these sidings stopped. Back to the main spur, it continued along Idaho Walk. Past the entrance to Ohio Grove and to the left of this grass field area. A locomotive shed was situated on what is now the corner of Ohio Grove and Idaho Walk. At Michigan Place, at this exact spot, another spur broke off which ran up to and ended at Dakota Close. Again, it's unclear when this ceased being used. The main spur followed the curve of what is now Michigan Place and down along this footpath towards Burtonwood Road. At Burtonwood Road, you can clearly see the location of a gated level crossing. With the train in the siding, it could only go as far as this location on Burtonwood Road, where it met a set of gates. Soldiers from Hedder House would open the gate to allow the train in. There was a set of spurs on what is now Sunset Boulevard, which split into 3 directions here, each with their own sidings. The left-hand siding ran down to what is now Warrington West Station on San Diego Drive. The curve straightened out here, and a straight section of track ran down to the end of San Diego Drive towards the station. The right-hand spur is now covered by the houses on Chicago Place. Back on Sunset Boulevard, we can see where the former curved section of track, which was the central spur to Hedder House, lay. This way led to Hedder House. This way led back to the main line. You can still see the same houses today. It's important to note that these houses were built after the closure, and these old photos were taken during the redevelopment of the area. All of the street names I've been referring to and will refer to didn't exist during the branch line's operational era. The main spur ran through what is now Boston Boulevard and along this large park area, ending where Manhattan Gardens is today. Hedder House ran along this park area, and you can really gauge how big it was. The track was placed alongside the length of the warehouse, and the train would crawl up the length where it was met by soldiers. This is where the track ended at a set of buffers. The train would be accompanied until the end, as it proceeded along the length of the huge warehouse at walking pace to the numbered bay where goods would be loaded or unloaded into the warehouse. Trains brought things into Burtonwood as well as out. The loading area was covered with a canopy, and it took a long time for the train to reach the far end of Hedder House, depending on which entrance was being used. The drivers weren't privy to what they were carrying on their train, however the wooden wagons often had explosive warning plates on, and so it's safe to assume that the trains carried some bullets, shells, or other explosive materials. At one point, Fiat cars were shunted onto the line for a distribution firm that had a portable loading ramp. They would also carry vehicles such as jeeps and other small armoured vehicles on flat wagons. Many items were moved in order to be disposed of by the Defence Reutilization and Marketing Office, or DRMO, near RAF Molesworth. Civilians could buy equipment such as jeeps. One of the last trains out of Burtonwood was a container loaded with 2 full-sized portable hospitals headed for Hull docks and bound for Ramstein Air Base in Germany. For the most part, during the 1980s, the driver would have to remain in the loco cab whilst the wagons were unloaded into the warehouse. They could go to a canteen in the 1970s for a can of Dr Pepper, which wasn't yet available in the UK, and donuts. One driver asked if he could get out of the locomotive and look into the warehouse. He was allowed, and saw the giant Hedder House filled with miles of shelving, jeeps on wooden pallets, semi-assembled with their wheels in the back of the vehicle, and stacked 4 or 5 high, each on an individual shelf. One source told me that later on, the trains were pushed in, and the locomotive disappeared, although with the train being pushed in, the loco would have been at the far end and out of sight. Some trains were half the length of the loading bay, so reasonably long. One worker on the warehouse side told me he remembers loading and unloading anything from vehicles to general supplies. The line was used a lot more during the early 80s up until the Gulf War. They never asked where the trains came from, so they guessed they could have come from other ports across the UK. He worked there from 1985 to around 1993 and was one of the last to leave when the base finally closed down. He worked in a few areas, but mainly on the vehicle side, sorting them, storing them, and bringing them for maintenance and repair and so on. He was employed by the US Army, but as a civilian, as most of them were. When it was time for the train to leave the siding, the guard would once again request that the signaller unlock the ground frame. He would change the direction of the points and clear the exit signal. Once the train was on the main line and clear of the points, the guard returned the frame and signalled to normal. The signaller would once again relock the frame, which allowed trains towards Warrington Central to run normally once the Burtonwood train was out of the way. Towards the end of the 1980s and early 1990s, trains were rare and only arrived for short periods. Hummers were brought in and out for the Gulf War, and Abrams tanks and armoured personnel carriers were scheduled to be brought in. However, the concrete ground couldn't support it all, so just a few APCs arrived in the end. During the Gulf War era, most goods started to come in via HGV. The line was now old and not maintained due to the lack of use, so trains became scarce in the later years. In some instances, the MOD used Chinook helicopters to bring equipment in and out of the base, as Eddie Whitman and others documented in 1989 and 1990. When the Cold War ended at the end of 1991, Burtonwood Army Depot was declared excess to NATO requirements and was closed by June 1994. Since then, the site has been completely redeveloped, but as you can see, certain elements of the branch line remain in place, especially the route. The semaphore signal was never removed, but the ground frame was out of use by May 1993. It's not clear when the track was lifted, but it survived into the mid-1990s at least, and was likely removed as the land was redeveloped. Today, the whole area has been built on, leaving very little evidence of Britain's Little America branch line.